Our next guest was in the headlines quite a bit around April 15th. That's the date when he flew a gyrocopter onto the grounds of the United States Capitol, flying all the way from Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Doug Hughes is a postal carrier from Ruskin, Florida, and this act created quite a bit of attention. It is now 6 weeks later, and we wanted to catch up and see what's going on with Doug Hughes, why he did it, how he's feeling now. So, Doug, thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Oh, absolutely. Now, listen, I wanted to ask you landed, first of all, let's kind of set the stage for folks here. You landed on the grounds of the Capitol, the U.S. Capitol, with 535 letters addressed to all the members of Congress. What did those letters say?
Basically, I was saying that the voters are on to Congress as far as they're being bought off is concerned, and I said that they've got three options in this next election. They can either pretend that there is no corruption, or they can pretend that they're against the corruption while they sabotage any reform, or the third option was they can actually roll up their sleeves and get involved with reform.
And what kind of reformer are you talking about? Are you talking about getting money out of politics or something else?
Getting money out of politics is the best definition of it. There's really two parts to it. We need a constitutional amendment that says money is not speech, corporations are not people. And then that amendment needs to protect the legislation that can then be passed that the courts would not be able to strike down.
So I think a lot of people would certainly agree with the sentiment. I think a lot of us support that wholeheartedly. Now, let me ask you, before you did this, had you been politically involved at all, or is it just something you'd been building up to for a while, or have you been politically involved all along?
It's something that I have been politically aware of for quite a number of years, and the stunt itself took me 2 years in the planning before I actually flew. But no, I am not aligned with any other group. I'm a registered Democrat, but this isn't a liberal or a conservative thing. It's something that just about any American who looks at the subject can agree with.
I think, well, the polls show that there is a lot of agreement with that. We're talking with Doug Hughes, who is the postal carrier who flew a gyrocopter onto the White House lawn. Why did it take 2 years to plan? What took up all that time?
Well, I wanted to do something that was spectacular enough to get everybody's attention, but it had to focus the attention on the problem. So that pretty much said I'm going to do something, and it's got to be right there at the Capitol. A friend of mine suggested that when we had been discussing the problem, both of us being mailmen, he said what we need to do is send a registered letter to every member of Congress. And I said they'd never read it, it would get trashed. But that was the nucleus of the idea, delivering letters to every member of Congress where the message was that they have got to straighten up their act.
And so what you did, for folks who don't know you, I believe you made the gyrocopter look like it was a postal service vehicle, and you landed on the White House, on the Capitol grounds with this. Now, let me ask you, just out of curiosity, were you concerned at any point that you might be shot down, that you might actually lose your life doing this?
I had sent word ahead, and I had been vetted by the U.S. Secret Service. So since they knew who I was and they knew I was not violent, I had done everything I could to get the word out before I flew, and that's why I flew from Gettysburg. I was an hour away from Washington. So they'd have plenty of time to figure out who I was, figure out that I wasn't violent, and decide that the course of least resistance was to let me land, rather than shoot me down.
Right, which means firing deadly weaponry over populated areas, but among other things, and taking a human life. But now let me ask you. This is nothing to do with the politics, but I'm just curious, so I have to ask you. First of all, I didn't realize that a gyrocopter could fly for an hour. That's a long way. And secondly, I have to ask, and I don't mean to lower the tone of the discussion any, but is it fun to fly a gyrocopter? I've flown ultralights, but it sounds like, all things considered, is it difficult to learn, and did you enjoy learning?
Yeah. Anybody who's considering it, I always point them out to PRA.org, which is Popular Rotorcraft Association, for learning how to fly and learning how to get one. They are very, very easy to fly, but they are tricky to take off and tricky to land. So
wow.
Anybody can fly one with just a few minutes of training, but the issues of getting them off the ground and on the ground safely, that's where all the training takes place.
Well, it's like they say, it's not the fall that kills you, it's a sudden stop. But so
fun. I have to. It is the most fun you can have out of bed.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a strong endorsement. So I'm glad to hear that part of it. Now, you since then have been charged with 2 felonies: flying without proper certification, of violating aircraft registration requirements, and 2 misdemeanors: violating national defense airspace. And I remember, by the way, from flying ultralights, that Washington has very restricted airspace about it, violating national defense airspace and operating a vehicle falsely labeled as a postal carrier. So those are misdemeanors. Were you surprised by the level of charges that were, by the intensity of the charges brought against you?
Yeah, to some degree, I'm still a little bit surprised by that, because standard operating procedure in D.C., when there is a protest or an act of civil disobedience, as long as there's no property damage and no injury and no intent of either of those, then they are typically processed without any attempt to bring felony charges. Okay. They're throwing the book at me because I managed to, and I didn't intend to, embarrass some powerful people. And that's why they're throwing the book at me, regardless of what the technical charges are.
So that's interesting. Now you say you let people know in advance. You say you were vetted by the Secret Service, which I assume means that somebody came to talk to you or something.
A year before I flew. Yep.
A year before you flew. Did they give you any indication that you might be committing a felony and looking at a lot of jail time?
No, at no time. In fact, the FAA's own documents that are on the websites indicate that if there may be a technical violation having to do with what the weight of the plane was, okay, and if the plane was overweight, in most cases you would be required to correct it, and there could be a fine of up to $1,000 per incident. That's how violations of flying out of the specifications of Part 103 is.
Right.
Okay.
But and
it's a felony. You have to look really hard to find any cases where they've actually prosecuted anybody for what they have charged me with.
So, yeah, okay. And we're talking with Doug Hughes, who is the postal carrier who flew a gyrocopter onto the Capitol grounds. What about the public reaction? I know, you've been interviewed a lot. You've been in the press. In terms of the attention that this stunt has gotten, has it been what you expected? Has it been disappointing? Has it exceeded your expectations? How do you feel about the response?
I deliberately didn't have any specific expectations about what would happen. So all I can say is I have been surprised. There's a Facebook page that I really was introduced to just this week called Free Doug Hughes. And I just joined up, and I'm not trying to use the page to get free, but I'm using it to spread the word. But what amazed me is this real grassroots, not AstroTurf, group on Facebook has over 2,000 members. Okay. I've gotten, I don't know hundreds of emails. I've gotten all kinds of real mail. And what seems to be happening is this is still gaining steam. I don't think that the impact of my stunt is going down. I think it's still building. I think people are trying to build on it and create the movement to reform Congress.
Well, that's interesting. And now, do you, in the meantime, while the momentum may be building, I understand that the Postal Service is moving to fire you, perhaps not unexpectedly, but what's the status there?
Well, I formally received a letter that says they intend to, okay, and the Carriers Association will challenge that and force the Postal Service to show that they have grounds for terminating me. It's kind of tricky because nobody did what I did before, and it's kind of difficult to establish if they do or they don't have grounds to fire me for something I did on my own time with my own vehicle. The logo on the plane I purchased legally with no deceit. The jacket I had was my personal property. And what I did was an act of civil disobedience for the purpose of restoring democracy, and how the post office was hurt by that, nobody's been able to explain.
So when and where do you expect to be tried, Doug?
It's being heard in Washington, D.C. I go back up there this month for my next hearing, and quite possibly after that, the next thing will be a trial.
You know, Doug, I have to say, for a guy who could be losing his job and maybe going to jail for 9.5 years, you sound sort of content. You don't sound, is that just the way you sound, or are somehow have you found some sort of serenity or tranquility in all of this? I
have an enormous amount of tranquility about what I'm doing and why I did it. I am trying to restore representative democracy so that everybody in Congress is working only for the people. Okay? The fact of the matter is, the country that we have is not the country that we were promised. No, let me correct that. The government we have is not the government we were promised. And everybody knows it. Everybody knows it's a ripoff. It's a fraud. They're not working for us. And I am not terribly stressed about my personal situation because I'm working on something that's just a whole lot more important.
All right. Well, I think that's a great answer, and we can't top that. So we'll be following your case, and perhaps we'll talk again. In the meantime, Doug Hughes, postal carrier, gyrocopter pilot, civil disobedience person, thank you for joining us on the program.
I'm honored you had me on, and I'll come back and talk to you anytime.
All right, sir. We appreciate that. And we will be right back after this. I'm RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.